Welcome to our panel today on Charis Psaltis and Brady Wagoner's book on conflict and change, integrating social and development psychology, and discussion with Meltem, Onurkan, Samani from CPDC Cyprus, and with Karina, Korostelina from George Mason University Carter School of Peace and Conflict Resolution, myself also from American University and George Mason, and Charis Psaltis is also with us. I just wanted to briefly introduce him. Charis Psaltis is a professor of social and developmental psychology at the University of Cyprus, where he has taught since 2006 and served as chair of the Department of Psychology from 2002 to 2024. His research focuses on intergroup relations, collective memory, peace education, conflict transformation, history teaching, with particular expertise on Cyprus and other divided societies. So I just wanted to leave the floor to Charis right now, and then we will start our discussion on the book. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. So this is a book, it was published in December last year by Cambridge University Press. It's presented as an edited book, but it's actually a hybrid book in the sense that it's comprised of two parts. The first part is written by myself, which is more or less a theoretical framework that I call genetic social psychology, and I will explain what it is. And the second part is a series of 6 or 7 commentaries by colleagues all around the world who are mostly social and developmental psychologists offering their commentaries. This started as a kind of talk to the University of Aalborg. I was invited by Brady Wagoner to present my framework, the work I'm proposing a few years ago. And on that opportunity, we decided to apply with a book proposal. So Brady invited the commentators, and I wrote the first part. So what I will be talking about today is mostly a description of the theoretical framework that I describe as genetic social psychology and its relevance to the theme of our conference, which is reconciliation. I must say that due to a very generous grant from Peace Return, headed by Professor Neophytos Loizidis at Warwick, we managed to have the book open access, so you can take a picture of that and you can download it for free. The theoretical challenge for me was how to bridge two subdisciplines that are usually not connected in our understanding of reconciliation, of conflict transformation, which is social psychology and developmental psychology. I'm a social and developmental psychologist, so what I'm trying to do is to understand human development as part of a process of growing up in a society filled with intergroup dynamics, social identities, power asymmetries, and values at the broader cultural level. And what we call in social psychology, social representations. I try to understand where these social representations come from in a developmental trajectory. And so one of the chapters, as you will see, concerns history teaching. I'm sure we all recognize the importance of history teaching in forming our perceptions of the other, and otherness more generally, the antagonistic group or a historical enemy group. And the importance of that is actually key in the book, because I'm describing the processes through which the exact narratives, the exact frameworks evoked in our history textbooks, and how they create this distance between the two communities in Cyprus. Now, I go to the genetic part of it. Genetic is a term that doesn't have to do with genes or biology, actually, because it predates the developments and our discoveries of DNA. It comes from Jean Piaget's genetic epistemology, which is the study of knowledge and how knowledge changes from form A to form B. So what I'm trying to understand is the mechanisms behind how we change as human beings individually and as societies, how we change in time our social representations about the other group, about history, about the past. So this is about 3 processes, essentially. Let me explain the 3 processes. So the first process, you can see it here, is microgenesis. Microgenesis is the process of dialogue. And in social psychology, we talk about intergroup contact specifically. You understand, Cyprus is actually a very good example of studying this phenomenon, and it's important because back in 2003, we had the opening of checkpoints that made possible the meeting and discussions between people of the two communities. Up to that point, from 1974, for 30 years, there was no possibility for that contact unless you went out of Cyprus to study in the UK, for example, or the United States, or maybe to go to the only mixed village standing in Cyprus, Pila, in the Larnaca area, where there were some specific conflict resolution meetings there. So this was really an opportunity for people to start meeting each other, to interact, and to essentially study these processes of dialogue and social interaction. Then we are talking about ontogenesis, which is the developmental dimension of this, because from the time we are born to the time of death, we actually change our views all the time through a developmental process of that is constrained by our developmental level, our knowledge, our skills, our interactions with parents, teachers, etc. And then we have sociogenesis, which is the historical change in time. So let me give you an example. Back in 2003, we had the opening of the checkpoints. Now it's 2026. We're actually talking about 23 years, one generation after the opening of the checkpoints. So here, very important questions are created of the kind of how would a generation that is raised with open checkpoints, with Cyprus being part of the EU, be different in how they think about the Cyprus problem compared to a generation, my generation, for example, Generation X, and my father's generation, who lived before 1974 and the events of complete geographical separation. So the book has an empirical part where we apply some very sophisticated mixed modeling, where we try to disentangle what we call the age effect from the cohort effect, and the age, cohort, and period. Period is when we collect data. So this empirically is based on 20 years of research of bicommunal representative sample surveys. So every 2 years, we collect about 800 to 1,000 samples from each community in Cyprus, and we have this comparative data on issues of contact, quality of contact, quantity of contact, threats, realistic symbolic threat, trust, whether they accept particular forms of solution supported or not by the EU, like a bizonal bicommunal federation, a two-state solution, a unitary state, or just continuing with the current situation. So the models try to predict, for example, our support for BBF, bizonal bicommunal federation, or our support for a compromise solution, or trust, which is a very important variable as an outcome in social psychology, because trust is at the epicenter of whatever we try to do in terms of reconciliation. So you see the real connection here. And there are predictors at different levels of whether a certain specific birth period makes the change, a certain educational level, certain forms of contact, etc. So we have some models there in one of the specific chapters. Another part of the book is a more autobiographical chapter, which describes my life and my ontogenetic trajectory as a refugee from internally displaced people from Varosha, how my parents would talk to me about the Varosha and not being able to be there, and this longing for the house of return. So through this process, I explained how a person who was internally displaced and at some point had quite nationalistic ideas about the Cyprus issue is transformed through contact, through study, through meeting other people. So it's also the more autobiographical connected with more empirical. So this gives you an idea of the book. And then, as I said, in the second part, there are commentaries. So I will leave it to here. Thank you. And here is the book in print.
Yeah, it's real.
It's real. It exists.
Yes. So, and our next discussant will be Meltem Onurkan Samani. She's actually a historian with a PhD and a peace building practitioner, an independent policy consultant with over 20 years of experience at the intersection of governance, conflict resolution, and civil society engagement in Cyprus. And she is the founder of CPDC, which is Cyprus Peace and Dialogue Center, and very active since 2020. And I'm also, in engagement. All of us actually are in engagement with her NGO. So we would love to learn more about the book. Please, floor is yours, Meltem.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. It's a real privilege to reflect on conflict and change here in Cyprus with such a distinguished international audience. I want to speak today not only as a reader of this book, Charis book, but also as someone whose professional and political life has unfolded within many of the questions it raises. I speak as a Turkish Cypriot historian, a long-time bicommunal peace practitioner, former co-chair of the Technical Committee on Education, and also the coordinator of the generally technical committees, and a former advisor to the former Turkish Cypriot leader during the negotiations. So I wanted to give this background because I come to this conversation from both scholarship and practice, from the Turkish Cypriot perspective, of course, shaped by years of trying to understand how conflict changes and how it often does not change. Charis and I have known each other since the opening of the crossing points in 2003, when many of us were trying to make sense a new possibility, what it meant after decades of separation to finally encounter one another and perhaps imagine Cyprus differently. And yet, more than 2 decades later, we are here now. Here we are. After all the encounters, projects, committees, friendships, disappointments, hopes, the Cyprus problem remains unresolved. These are questions many of us in Cyprus have lived with in practice for years. How does contact become transformation? How does encounter become trust? How does trust become institutional change? And under what conditions does change remain fragile, partial, or reversible? We witnessed the answers of all of these questions sometimes. Charis' book makes me think more seriously about the conditions under which contact matters, the limits of what it can do on its own, and the wider developmental, social, political, and historical contexts in which it operates. In that spirit, I would like to offer 3 reflections from my own experience in Cyprus. First, contact matters, but contact alone does not transform conflict. In Cyprus, this is worth stating clearly because peace building has sometimes oscillated between 2 simplistic assumptions, either that contact is enough or that it is meaningless. I don't think either is correct. My parents' generation, as Charis already told you, often lived in mixed villages and towns. They had contact. They spoke each other's languages. They knew one another in ordinary ways. And yet, that contact did not protect them from violence, fear, displacement, and war. My own generation, Charis' generation and mine, grew up very differently. We had almost no meaningful contact with the other community until our early 30s, that we became professionals. We became historians or psychologists or academics. We were raised in separate school systems, separate narratives, separate commemorations, separate silences. And yet, many of us were still willing, even eager, to meet listen, argue, collaborate, and build relationships across the divide once the possibility opened immediately. So what does this tell us? That contact matters, but is not sufficient, and that the absence of contact does not automatically make reconciliation impossible. What matters is not contact in the abstract, but its quality, timing, political framing, and institutional support. What I take from Charis' work is that the key question is not simply whether people meet, but what histories, fears, wounds, values, identities, and power relations they bring into the encounter. In other words, it refuses to isolate intergroup contact from the wider structures that shape it. And that, I think, is exactly right for Cyprus, because our problem has never been simply one of ignorance or distance. It has also been a problem of competing national narratives, unequal recognition, unresolved trauma, institutional division, geopolitical dependency, and repeated political failure. Contact can soften boundaries, create empathy, build familiarity, and open imagination. But on its own, it cannot carry the full burden of transformation. My second reflection is that trust matters enormously, but personal trust is not the same thing as political transformation. A great deal of peace building in Cyprus has depended on trust built slowly between individuals. I know this not only in theory, but from experience. I worked for years in spaces like the Home for Cooperation. I assume that tomorrow you are going to be there. And I've been in the Litra Palace Hotel and also the Nicosia airport that the negotiations are conducted and the technical committees meetings are conducted there. These were the spaces where trust did not emerge instantly and certainly not romantically. It was built through repeated collaboration, disagreement, reliability, frustration, and shared work over time. When the two leaders assigned me as a Turkish Cypriot the task of drafting the mandate of the Technical Committee on Education, so it was interesting that the Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot leader gave the task to a Turkish Cypriot coordinator to draft the newly established Technical Committee on Education's mandate. And I experienced it as a serious responsibility. It involved political sensitivity, intercommunal trust, and an educational vision for what such a committee could become. And I asked a Greek Cypriot to draft the first draft of the mandate. And no surprise, it was Charis Psaltis sitting close to me, not simply because he was an expert, but because I trusted him. That trust had been built through years of shared work from 2003-04 until when was the establishment of the Technical Committee on
2016.
2016. So over the many years, shared work and the knowledge that we could think seriously together, even when we disagree. A similar thing happened when, again, I was asked by the two leaders to suggest not only the Turkish Cypriot, but also Greek Cypriot names to be appointed as the members of the Technical Committee on Education, whom I considered both competent and trustworthy or committed for the committee. And I proposed people I knew from bicommunal work, people with whom a relationship of confidence already existed throughout the years. These are small examples, but they illustrate something important. Peace processes often move forward not only through official mandates, but through networks of trust built below and around them. At the same time, I want to be very clear about the limits of this. A friendship is not a peace process. If so, we would solve the Cyprus problem. A bicommunal committee, technical committee or education or other technical committees, is not structural transformation at all. No. A good project is not a settlement. And trust among a relatively small group of peace-oriented individuals is not the same as trust between communities, institutions, and publics. This is one of the painful lessons of Cyprus. We have built spaces of contact, educational initiatives, civil society networks, technical committees, relationships of genuine trust, but the wider political environment has often remained hostile, stagnant, or simply disconnected from these efforts. So the real question is not whether trust matters. It clearly does. But how trust built at the civic and interpersonal level can be translated into broader political and institutional change. And here I would add something from my experience, both inside and around formal peace process structures. One of Cyprus' recurring problems is the weak transmission belt between civic peace building and formal negotiations. We have often treated these parallel worlds, one producing trust, dialogue, and ideas, the other producing official agreements, or more often, not agreements, official deadlocks they produce. Unless those worlds are connected more deliberately, we remain trapped between two insufficiencies: a civic field rich in dialogue but structurally marginal, and a negotiation field politically central but socially under-owned. My third reflection, the last one, is that the real challenge is not simply contact, but how to convert civic learning into societal and political change. For years, many of us invested in bicommunal education, youth work, and common spaces because we believed and still believe in the importance of creating spaces where young people can meet early and speak across difference. But experience has also taught us that contact alone does not automatically produce trust. Without equality, without recognition, critical reflection, and institutional support, contact can remain superficial and sometimes even reproduce suspicion. This is why I have become increasingly interested not only in contact, but in the conditions that make contact transformative. So we witness these integrated or mixed schools experiences as well. There are important problems. And recently through CPDC, as Gül was mentioning, Cyprus Peace and Dialogue Center, together with Charis, Neophytos, etc., we try to follow a different path to connect peace building with the transformation of the broader circumstances in there. So, okay, transformation does not happen by magic. It requires preparation, facilitation from the civic level as well. Like we work at under the presidencies, we also try to prepare, facilitate emotional support, continuity, anchoring in wider social and institutional environments. Otherwise, change remains confined to individuals and may not survive the pressures of the wider conflict context. And if we expect contact to contribute not only to personal openness, okay, it contributed, we are maybe much more open now, openness, but to the transformation of a political conflict, then we need to go further still. We need spaces of structured, informed, and sometimes difficult dialogue about the actual substance of conflict as well, like power sharing, political equality, governance, security guarantees, displacement, memory, recognition, and the trade-offs of a future settlement. coming together simply for the sake of contact may create familiarity. It doesn't necessarily create political preparedness. If you leave them intact, the real issues of the conflict, and avoid to address the sensitive and controversial issues, and just you have a nice work, enjoy a meal, dance together, sing together, and go back to the homes, then the problem is intact in there. This is one reason why in my own work now, I increasingly see peace building and process design as connected. The question is not only how people meet, but how societies are helped to understand, deliberate, and prepare for the difficult decisions that peace requires. One additional question I would add from the practitioner side is how we sustain the people who sustain contact. This is also I wanted to mention here. People engaged in bicommunal and peace-oriented work often carry disappointment from multiple directions, including ourselves. We are expected to remain hopeful even when negotiations fail. I was in Crans-Montana, and I remember how I felt in there. It was a great disappointment and frustration, but I tried to remain hopeful even when I faced all the mess in there, and the political climate deteriorates, and the cost of speaking across boundaries rise. We face this as well. So peace builders also need recognition, protection, and spaces where they can speak honestly, not only about hope, but also about fatigue, grief, and frustration. That too is part of the ecology of reconciliation. Let me conclude here. What I value conflict and change is that it refuses to see conflict as static. I like this. It shows how fears, loyalties, memories, and boundaries are produced over time, but also how they can be challenged, complicated, and transformed. So, Charis, thank you for giving us a book that is intellectually rich, politically relevant, and deeply connected to the lived realities of divided societies. I am also grateful for the generosity with which you acknowledge our shared work and refer to my own contribution in its pages. And thank you too for many years of shared work, disagreement, friendship, commitment. I hope the next generation will inherit not only our contacts, institutions, and unfinished projects, but also the courage to ask even better questions than we did. Thank you.
All right, so I now wanted to leave the floor to our president, the distinguished professor Karina Korostelina from Carter School of Peace and Conflict Resolution.
Thank you very much. It's really huge pleasure to be here, and it's celebration of this book, which is long needed, because this book, I know Charis for at least probably 15 years. Yes, so, and was interesting, we met at the conference here in Cyprus. I was invited on memory, right? And me and Charis immediately started, because even as a social psychologist, we still come from different perspective. I'm from identity studies, he comes from social perspective studies, but we immediately bonded because we trying to answer the same question. And what this book is really happy for me to see is because it's answering one of the key in two parts of the same question: how conflict societies develop these people, who, like, how it's happening, that what institutions, what processes really impact the development of a person in conflict society, how a person create new these attitudes, perceptions, values, ideas through this conflict in a society. And at the same time, how these people who develop in these societies, how they reproduce conflict, how they continue to reproduce the same patterns, participate in the same structures and the same institutions. And I think this is very important, how we interrupt this cycle. And this book is really great opportunity to think about it. And Charis was talking about Piaget genetic psychology, but his book definitely going beyond it, beyond even Vygotsky, because Vygotsky definitely upgrade Piaget, and he moved from St. Petersburg to Central Asia because he had sickness, and then he came completely different culture. He realized, oh my gosh, it's culture. Culture matters, right, at 1920s. And because Piaget was mostly working in the same middle class environment in France. So, and I think Charis' book really taken on these both very important foundations in developmental psychology and social psychology, understanding how you develop and how culture matters. So for me, the key message of the book is that reconciliation is not just attitudinal outcome, but it's also development transformation on how societies understand themselves, understand others, their relationships. And my work, I see a lot of resonance with this particular book. I definitely see the way how I can incorporate these great ideas into my work. And one of them is my conceptualization of collective memory as ideology. Because for a long time, I struggled with ideas how to understand and how to explain people, for example, conflict in Ukraine. A lot of people were telling me, oh my gosh, it's ethnic conflict, or it's conflict of languages. But how you can tell it's ethnic and conflict of languages that half of countries speak both languages? How it can be ethnic and majority of families mix ethnic? How you put this line, right? So I always was struggling to tell people, no, it's not ethnic, it's not about languages, it's about collective memory as ideology. And recently in a book on memory sites, I developed this theoretical perspective because this really helped me to explain a lot of other conflicts which I see. So what is ideology, right? Ideology is basically politicized mythology. And this is what you're also talking about, different reproduction of these myths. Myths are not fairy tales, right? Myths are simplified models, social representations, what Charis is working on, social representations of reality, right? We here in Cyprus were like a lot of ancient Greeks, right? For example, they believe that gods walking, if you walk very quickly, you can see God crossing the corner, right? Around the corner. So they believed a lot of this. We still believe in it. We still have so many mythologies which incorporated in we knock on wood, right? All cultures. It's because our predecessors were hitting the wood to create big sounds before they go to hunt or to the war, right? To spook bad spirits. We still do it. And I can go again and again with black cats and all of this. So we still live in mythologies. And mythology of conflict is the same way. So collective history, collective representation, and you put a lot of efforts about understanding collective memory, collective history. This book is real. I really recommend to look, especially it's open access, it's dream, right, to have it. And it's completely deserved. So what I mean by functioning of collective memory as ideological construct? First of all, really understand that collective memory is not just something fuzzy, nice, which belong to mnemonic communities. Collective memory is political construct because collective memory have prescriptions of what should be done. It's not only about the past. I always tell history is not about the past. History about the future. What should be done based on our knowledge? It's connotation of intergroup relations which decline for us what should be done towards the other. Who is the other? How we define the other? and what should be done, right? And it's clear legitimization of our inspiration and our ideas. So it's a political construct which also created this, I call it time expansion of threat. So we take threat from the past and bring it to the current situation, and we tell them it's continuous. They always feel like that. Like in Ukraine, then interview Ukrainian refugees just after the war started. All of them were telling me Russia always wanted to kill us. They immediately narrative change, and they start bringing things from Golodomor, like this famine, which was Soviet Union, not Russia, right? So they brought other examples. So they strongly believe that Russia always wanted to kill and destroy Ukraine. And this become, again, strong belief in this. So this expansion of threat, and I know in Cyprus, it's not just Cypriot. We're speaking about Cypriot conflict, of course, but it's definitely going much beyond. It's going to dark ages of Ottoman occupation of the Greece, right? It's coming into Christian expansion, and it's about the Istanbul, the Byzantine Empire, right? There are so much other threats which incorporated. Then I was working in Armenia, the Armenian-Azerbaijani conflicts. For them, it's also like when you go to Armenia, what you see in any official building, you see map of Armenia, 2 centuries BC. Armenia from the sea to the sea, inspirational map, right? Because this is where trauma is. This is where idea. So it's really political construct and expansion of threat. This is what we were, and now we're so small, they took it from us. So Nagorno-Karabakh, for them, then you talk to people, it's all about genocide of 1913, right? So it's all interrelated. This expansion of threat, expansion of threat make it political. Second, and I see it's in Cyprus again, this is so important. Second, it's collective memory. It's not something which is coherent. And I describe these processes, which I really, really love. You address a lot of these processes in a different way, but you really stress this process. So it's processes of borrowing, intermixing, ascription, resulting competition of ownership and tension of intergroup relations. So collective memory intermix, they borrow elements from each other, and they have ownership of particular elements of the history and fighting for this competing ownership of it. And we see it the same way, who belonged, right? In North and South Korea, the whole conflict is about which Korea was the first. Right? This constant archaeological conflict. Which Korea? We are real Korean and they're not, right? This constant competing things about it. Who own this particular piece of the history and who has control over defining this particular group of history. And I really love it in the book of Charis. He put a lot of attention to values and ideas, how values develops, how conflict societies produce particular set of values and how people internalize them through their microgenesis and ontogenesis and others, and how then that values define, right? Because they have it's not just value because it's something nice for me. Value have strong normative power, right? They define what should be done. They lead us. And I define in my research value in this book specifically as a time collapse. Because what happened, value put together the past, the present, the future in this amalgamation of something or assessment, desirable goals and normative behaviors, which results in the perception of history as a zero-sum game. It's only my history or your history. And collective memory becomes zero-sum game. As soon as I try to convince other people that no, you have some problems with your description of history and your collective memory, people become defensive. They're ready to die to defend collective memory. Japan-Korean relations, right? The whole conflict is really about what happened during the invasion and occupation and how we define it. And in Korea, it's basically, you could not tell now that it's actually the Korean leadership which collaborated with Japanese government during this. It's something which creates a value. We always were resistant. We need to resist Japan, and we do it. But a complete denial, like comfort women, is awful issue. But again, it's impossible in Korea to tell. The girls were not picked up on the streets. They were referred by their teachers because the girls were 12 years old. Their teachers referred them to the Japanese government at this time, Japanese Korean, because it was Korean. So we really need to understand that in this time collapse is really developing this zero-sum game. We either victims or we are, and any complexity perceived as attack on us, any complexity perceived as attack on our ideas. And this is clear, right? So in this history education, I wrote so many books about history education. In Cyprus, we saw this wonderful documentary. It's exactly the same. It's attack, right, on our history, attack on our memory. And finally, the key of it, why I really see this collective memory as ideology, because it's embedded in truth and power struggles. It's really help, and you just defined 3 forms of dealing with the truth and power in your work. So I also see 3 very similar processes. Again, we work from different perspectives, but addressing a lot of, I speaking about protection of meta-narrative, when it's what your dominance, you're talking about this, when people, the governments, collective memories trying to protect it. But I also speak about intergroup contestation, this wars of histories, right? This, what we saw in documentaries is red versus, it's so interesting for me now. I seen it, I could not unseen it, right? I always believe in red and blue, it's America. No, red and blue is Cyprus. And social emancipation, these narratives of communities, of peace builders, what Meltem was telling us, this group of people who create their own social emancipation as peace builders. Let's develop these ideas. So I will stop here. Again, congratulations. It's a very, very important book and make me so excited.
Thank you very much.
All right. So I think they said everything. But it's, it's very excited. I'm very excited to be in this panel because we are speaking the same language and we are understanding each other and we're trying to make this work forward. So I have a couple of notes. I'm just going to go over them and hopefully we'll have some time for questions too. So first of all, thank you, Charis, for this important thought-provoking book. It was a great read. And as I was reading it, I found myself returning to a question that sits at the center of both your work and my research as well. Like, how does transformation become possible in divided societies? It looks like a very general question. But I'm like, not whether reconciliation happens, not whether peace agreements are signed, but what are the processes and conditions that make this transformation possible in the first place? So yesterday, I was at the panel. I was the chair of panel, and one of the speakers was Professor Ki-jong Nam from University of Seoul. And as someone who comes from a divided society, North Korea, South Korea, he spoke about how impressed he was by his experience in Cyprus. This was his first time. He described crossing to the other side, having a dinner, and then returning safely. And for him, this was a very extraordinary experience. He even said that Cyprus is living the dream he has for his own country. Mm. So This comment made me reflect on this Cypriot case, and we also had some conversation in the panel with him about this is the situation in Cyprus, this is the situation in Korea. So from the outside, Cyprus appears to have achieved something remarkable. In Cyprus, we have become relatively good at creating microgenesis moments, like dialogues, workshops, as you said, a lot of encounters, eating together, dancing together. Actually, yesterday we had a bicommunal choir. Many of you listened, how beautiful it was. So lots of awareness raising initiatives, joint projects, opportunities for contact. Of course, these moments are extremely important. They challenge stereotypes in the first place, and they create new experiences for people. They open possibilities for cooperation. But the question that interests me is, what is next, right? So what, now what? It's always microgenesis, ontogenesis, and sociogenesis is the same argument. So how do these moments become lasting transformations within individuals? How do we move from microgenesis to ontogenesis that he talks in the book? How does a single encounter become durable shift in identity, perception, or understanding? And perhaps even more importantly, how do these individual transformations accumulate into sociogenesis eventually? So how do they become broader societal changes capable of reshaping norms, values, institutions, realities, political realities? So this is where I see a very powerful connection between his book and the research that I'm doing. So over the last decades, I worked on Cyprus. Very interested in my PhD dissertation was also about minorities in Greece and Turkey. And you cannot understand Greece and Turkish relations without understanding Cyprus, vice versa. It's like this triangle, so you have to study together. So I worked on functional coexistence argument to describe what is going on right now at this microgenesis to ontogenesis stage for me in Cyprus. And we looked at it in an article, superordinate, sustained superordinate cooperation in our recent article on Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot cooperation. So as Meltem also said, yes, we have a lot of technical committees working on different issues. We have committee on missing people. And by the way, as she also said, tomorrow at the buffer zone, we have 3 panels, and 2 of them is on these committees. So technical committee on heritage and technical committee on missing people, they will be with us. So we see cultural heritage projects, cultural projects, education projects, environmental cooperation, health initiatives. You had listened a lot of these examples throughout the conference, right? During the COVID-19, for instance, sharing vaccines and PPEs. If there's a problem in the north about mosquitoes, of course, this is an island, so South also needs to cooperate. So a lot of cooperation is happening too. So we see it in many examples of people working together to solve practical problems despite continuing political disagreement. So traditionally, like peace-building scholars, we ask whether these initiatives produce sustainable peace. Increasingly, I found myself asking a little different question. What happens to people when they cooperate? So how do repeated interactions reshape their perceptions, and in which ways? How do shared goals alter relationships? How do individuals begin to see each other differently? And how do these small changes accumulate in time? And reading this book really helped me to think about these initiatives not simply as problem-solving mechanisms, but also spaces of development, or developmental spaces that he was talking about. So spaces where new identities become possible, spaces where old assumptions are challenged, spaces where alternative social representations emerge, spaces where people learn to navigate difference differently. So in this sense, cooperation itself becomes a mechanism of transformation. And second connection comes from my recent research about trust and distrust perceptions in Cyprus. So over the last year, actually, I collected data with different, Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot participants, and I tried to understand, because we keep saying we need trust, we build trust building mechanisms, but what is trust? How do they understand what is trust? So I was just asking people trust and distrust perception in their everyday life. How do they understand trust in institutional context? How do they understand trust in their micro spaces, in group relations, and so on? So one of my most important finding is that trust is rarely a simple yes or no phenomena. People often trust and distrust simultaneously. Like you can really embody trusting and distrusting to Cypriots at different stages in your life. Even in a day, you can trust Charis, but you can distrust another person, or you can trust Greek Cypriot group of people because you know them, you work them, you cooperate them, but maybe you don't have trust to others in the Cypriot community. So very, very big spectrum of actually trust and distrust that I found interesting layers and colors. So trust a colleague, but distrust a community. Trust cooperation, but distrust political leader. Trust intentions, but distrust outcomes. So as a result, I have begun developing this continuum of trust and distrust because people's experiences cannot be captured through this binary understandings of yes, there is a trust, or no, there is no trust. As I was reading his work, I kept asking myself, where does trust fit in developmental change? Is trust simply an outcome of contact and cooperation? Because Meltem also said we trust each other, but it's not moving from this to concrete outcomes. Or is trust one of the mechanisms that make transformation possible? So I suspect it's both, everything, all of them, but in different moments it makes different meaning. So every meaningful interaction across conflict lines requires vulnerability, and every dialogue, of course, involving a lot of risk. Every act of cooperation containing also uncertainty. Yet what I found very interesting in Cyprus is that many people continue to cooperate despite maintaining certain forms of distrust. So this suggests that trust is not all or nothing. It exists in different levels, dimensions, and shades. Understanding different forms of trust may help us better understand how societies move from interaction to transformation. So this brings me to reconciliation, because the theme of the conference and all of us here are working for reconciliation too. So in my own work, I distinguish between what I call teen reconciliation and thick reconciliation. So teen reconciliation refers to coexisting without fighting, without killing each other, and maybe having some practical cooperation. Maybe Greek Cypriots going to the north to fill up their tanks because it's cheaper there, or have a dinner, or Turkish Cypriots go to the south and maybe they work or cooperate with their friends or see their friends. Very practical, sometimes transactional, or sometimes very deep cooperation. And the ability to manage all these differences, they do this without violence, which is the stage of what I call teen reconciliation. But thick reconciliation definitely involves deeper transformation, which I think all of us agree here that needs to be done, especially in Cyprus now. So it's about deep trust, it's about recognition, it's about empathy, it's about healing, really, like the wounds of past traumas. So more inclusive sense of community. Cyprus appears to have many elements of teen reconciliation. People cross checkpoints, conduct business, participate in activities, cooperate on practical matters, yet this deeper transformation still remains very uneven. So this is why I think one of the most important contribution of this book is that it helps us to think about how movement from teen reconciliation to thick reconciliation might occur. So not through a single political breakthrough, not through one agreement, but through developmental processes unfolding over time. So for me, the challenge facing both researchers and practitioners is understanding how creating more pathways from microgenesis to ontogenesis and eventually maybe sociogenesis. So how the first encounters become lasting personal transformations, how the transformed individuals contribute to transformed communities, how the transformed community contribute to transform society. So that, I believe, is one of the central questions in Cyprus today. That's why I call it functional coexistence example. It's enduring functional coexistence. And it's also one of the central questions raised by this same book. For me, the book was extremely helpful to put everything into one context of this developmental psychology idea and all the things that you mentioned. And not because for me the book is ultimately hopeful, by the way, and not because it ignores any of the issues, but because it reminds us that identity is definitely not fixed. Perceptions are not fixed, relationships are not fixed, so which is great news for us. So human beings are definitely capable of development, and if humans are capable of development, then divided societies are capable of transformation. So there is still hope, and of course we are in this business because we have hope to make this change. So thank you so much for the book. It's great book. Congratulations.
Thank you, Julie.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, we definitely want to give the floor also to the audience, but just 2 minutes from me to answer some questions here. Just for the sake of theoretical development, because I understood that all of your comments were really important both for practice and for theory development.
Yes.
So let me go just to this slide here that I have ready. Yes, this one. Okay. Yes, so there was discussion about the role of power and asymmetries and how do we move from personal trust, I understood that in all of your comments, to more institutional trust. And to start from trust, Gül, I also find it in my research that there is a divergence when you ask questions about whether you trust lay people and whether you trust politicians. Usually there is a gap. So that's I like very much the fact that you identify that gap. And that is actually not a uniform sense of trust. I would say that the question of how we move from the more personal trust to the more institutional and political trust is crucial. And it was also discussed by Meltem in her ideas. I think in the book you can find at least one effort to answer this question in this table, which is table 2.1, where I make links between the quality of social relationships that we build with other people and the consequences these social relations have of what we construct as consciousness. And I identify, as you said, 3 positions. It's the position of dominance, when we talk from a position of power and we want to impose our views on others. It's the position, the exactly opposite position of defense or victimization. And it's what I describe as the optimal path towards real transformation, which I call cooperation, a position of mutual respect. So I think the theoretical connections between these forms of relating to each other, historical consciousness, which is what is historical consciousness, is how we connect past, present, and future. And that was also mentioned by Karina before. How do we make this connection? For example, you gave the connection that history is collapsed, or sometimes we feel that it always repeats itself, and then we are trapped into this zero-sum thinking. So how do we go beyond that? I think cooperative relationships of the kind described by Meltem, not superficial, but that work to create institutions. And I think, Meltem, here, I think maybe you are a bit unfair to your work also, because, when you are so instrumental, exactly transforming personal relationships into institutions like technical committees, like the Imagine program that influenced the lives of 5,000 people, I think maybe, you should be a bit more.
I want more.
Yeah. Okay. But I do realize that that's one click beyond personal. We need to recognize that
Yes.
building on institutions
Yes.
and something that touches the heart of people, like imagine, is one step further than the personal.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Haris.
I think we can open the floor to any question. Please.
Functional coexistence exists in East Asia between Japan and South Korea. In particular days, even between North and South Korea. But that's all. If we dare to proceed into the next step of reconciliation or transformation of our own society, we will be caught by the nationalism, as Karina mentioned. Collective memory function as ideology. Those who advocate reconciliation would be regarded as a traitor of each nation. So I wonder how have you succeed to be treated not as traitor, but as a advocate of joint future. So the Karina speak out collective memory's ideological functions. I'm very impressed. And hearing Cyprus case, Cyprus is very idealistic model, and I envy Cyprus. But why not in other parts, Nagorno-Karabakh or East Asia? Other areas, collective memory's ideological function is normal. Cyprus is very exceptional case. So coming to Cyprus, I thought what made personal trusteeships convert into social trustee between Turkish Cypriot and Greek Cypriot. I suspect the geographical position of islanders must have accelerated this process of not regard advocate of reconciliation as traitor. And so I want to ask Meltem and Charis, have you ever been called as traitor of each nation? And how did you explain your own positions? Maybe future and present and past. Maybe vision is very important, but not only vision and not only functional coexistence, something shared by Cypriot. Maybe history or the geographical common interest must be important. So I want to hear. Thank you so much.
You start? Of course, we targeted or accused as being traitors from time to time. And this is also followed an evolutionary step. So it was worse when first the checkpoints or crossing points open up, because those days there was a polarization, even among the hardliners or the nationalistic circles, that the one group was saying that it would never work, so we cannot live together or get together, then they will start to fight, etc. We cannot trust them, etc. And the other group was that I believe that it was majority, and they were named themselves as the more realistic people, let's say. They were telling that the problems are political, not personal. So at personal level, no fights or no problem would appear. But the people like us who try to invest on coexistence peacefully and also settlement, and also we initiated for the first time in history of Cyprus to revise the history textbooks and to challenge the official narratives. And in fact, in the Turkish Cypriot community, we manage it. For the Greek Cypriot community, it was more complicated and challenged. At the end, they couldn't deliver at the same time. But for the different political situation in the Turkish Cypriot community, we at least revised the history textbooks of the Turkish Cypriot educational system, and the attacks were enormous. So I can divide it into two, that some politicians, not because they were genuinely believed that we were traitors, but they targeted us. This was really even dangerous. So how we manage? Maybe I can share how we react all this. First of all, we try to stay calm. We try to continue whatever we believe. We try to refer to the scientific and academic references, and not being too defensive or explanatory, but keep saying and keep doing what we have said. In the evolutionary period of time, after Crans-Montana, that the things changed, for example, that the Turkish side from Turkey and also Turkish Cypriot side, they changed track from federation to states. But those who keep advocating federation, and especially those who are the closest ADs of the Turkish Cypriot leader then, who confronted even with Turkey, we put on the stop list, for example. I didn't know that I was also on the list, and recently learned by a phone call of the current Turkish Cypriot leader that he called me and he said that from now on you can travel to Turkey. And I said I was also in the list. I didn't try because I was feeling, but one side of me was kept saying that maybe I was not there, because I never been like a radical, marginal personality or the stance, but still maybe certain circles might consider people like us more threat than the radical marginals, etc. Because we are very calm and we are telling, we are convincing, we reflect something rational, we say what we believe in, and also we give our references as well. Why that? So these are how to cope with when we are at.
Very brief question. EU or United Nations, did they empower you to be a normal person, to be a...
Well, the EU and the UN and the international audience, always their support is very limited. So in all conflict zones, you can hear the same thing, that the pro-peace people expect more from the international organizations or international law. But unfortunately, you see where we end up. Currently, everybody are saying that we should not trust to international law. It's a power dynamics in there, so they would side it with the power. 20 years ago, at least we were advocating that no, there is an international law and there should be. Now we are saying that there should be, but we cannot claim anymore that there is no double standard or whatever. And the UN is, at the end, when we say United Nations, they are under the Security Council. I mean, these 5 countries, Russia, Americans, UK, France, China. So these are so they cannot move. And in Cyprus, because of this unequal, asymmetric power relations between the Turkish Cypriot, because they consider Turkish Cypriots as a community, but on the other hand, the Republic of Cyprus is there. In fact, it was a partnership, but it's continued to be the recognized UN, under the UN, and also full member of the European Union, despite the division. So, yeah.
Little bit, we have in 3 minutes next session. So
I hope it helps.
yes, Charis, if you can maybe
Yeah.
quickly.
Very, very quickly. I had a slide there, which is the history of track
Thank
to
you so
diplomacy in Cyprus. You know, it started in 1963. When we were visiting last year Washington, D.C., we found the minutes of the first conflict resolution workshop on Cyprus, 1963, with the involvement of Herbert Keltman. All those who were involved in the 60s, 70s, 80s were always called traders in this kind of work. We with Meltem when we established the Bicommunal Association for Historical Dialogue and Research. We got a lot of attacks in the early days. But I think through our work and consistency, and what in the book is described as a genetic minority influence, which is consistency and presenting evidence and research is key. I think that was one secret of our success, and also support by international associations. I remember in 2004 we became local partners of the the Council of Europe. I was yesterday in a hackathon on AI and hate speech. I think you have a lighthouse. These are the principles we need to orient ourselves, and we do get the support of these organizations. Maybe not so much as we would like at some point, but I think they are there to support us. And the European Union now, I think, is a good lighthouse to orient us towards the solution also of the problem.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to reading your coming book.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations again.